What if Earth had no magnetic field?
Yes, so for this question, I decided to look at animals because there are a lot of animals that, like, they can sense the magnetic field around the Earth. And this sense is actually called magnetoreception. Like, the cause for this isn't really that well known from, like, in the world of science. There are two hypotheses. So the first one is cryptochromes. Cryptochromes are like a type of protein, and a lot of animals have cryptochromes in their eyes. It's like it's sensitive to blue light, so it's like it's sort of related to circadian rhythms and like your day-night cycle. That's like its main function in most animals, because we have cryptochromes too. It's the main function in us. But in some animals, it's also possible that it's responsible for sensing the magnetic fields. And looking more into it, I got really confused because the terminology is like pretty intense. It has something to do with like radical pair mechanism and spin chemistry and like, I don't know.
Oh, I can always hook you up with a chemist if you need a chemist.
Yeah, that'd be useful in like right now.
Well, I mean, if you had asked me like 3 days ago, I could have gotten you in touch with one.
Yeah. But anyway, so cryptochromes, there are different types of cryptochromes. There's Cry 1, Cry 2, and Cry 4. I don't know why they skipped Cry 3.
We don't talk about Cry 3.
Cry 3.
I'm not sure. I actually don't know if Cry 3 exists.
We don't talk about Cry 3.
I searched all of them. I searched Cry 1 and Cry 2 and Cry 4, and like the actual cryptochrome came up. I searched Cry 3, and Far Cry 3 came up. The video game. So I don't think it exists, and if it does, people don't talk about it. But yeah, there are lots of animals that have cryptochromes and that theoretically use them to sense magnetic fields. And an example of this is fruit flies. Fruit flies do this, and there are actually a lot of birds that do this. Now, the second hypothesis behind magnetoreception, it's hard for me to say that. Magnetoreception.
Magnetoreception, like the X-Men guy in his cell phone.
Mm-hmm. So the second hypothesis is iron clusters. So I guess a bunch of animals, they have like little small clusters of iron in like their cells or different parts of their body. And this iron comes in the form of either magnetite or maghemite.
Two of my favorite Pokemon. Yeah.
Yeah. So like on a nanoscale, there's a lot of these iron particles, and whenever there's a magnetic field, they shift within like a cell, and it causes a mechanical response in the cell, and that's like what causes a magnetic sense.
That seems more believable to me than the first theory, because like the first theory is, hey, they can see blue, and maybe the stuff that lets them see blue lets them see magnets, and the second theory is these bitches are full of iron for some reason, and iron is magnetic. I like that one.
Right.
Well, I guess the cryptochromes had to do with like they can see a certain wavelength of blue, and something in the magnetic field is related to blue, so they can see the magnetic field like visually.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I get it. It's just but it's like if you find out they're also full of iron that moves in a specific and reacts with a specific mechanism, it's like maybe it's that one. Maybe just maybe it's that one.
I mean, there was hypothesized that in homing pigeons, the iron was the cause for like the magnetic stuff, but then they disproved that, and now they're thinking it's the cryptochromes. So I don't know.
I mean, it is. I obviously, some very smart people have debated this and have actually done some research.
It was actually really annoying because I kept on finding things in my research where it was like, oh, okay, this is the way things are. This is interesting. I'm going to go down this path, and it'll be definitive in my answer. And then, like, a few sentences later, it'll be like, and then they disproved that. And they don't actually know. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in this field that they don't really know.
Yeah, a running theme in my research as well was, we actually don't know that very well.
Yeah. But some animals that exhibit this iron cluster theory there's like a bacteria that has this. They don't sense the magnetic field. They actually, like, the iron clusters in them just move them. So like dead bacteria, they'll still move in the direction of the magnetic field just because they have iron in them.
Well, that's kind of terrifying.
And then salmon also have magnetite in their nose, which helps them navigate. So those are the two main hypotheses. So what I wanted to look at was, do birds, like, because birds migrate, obviously, during like winter, they'll go more south, and then they'll go north in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see if they can't do this, what happens? Will they die? And what happens if they die? We already did a whole episode on if birds didn't exist, and we already know that's pretty bad.
What episode was that? 53?
That was, there's an episode right before this one.
Oh,
it was last
great.
week's episode.
Convenient.
They might still remember.
So I wanted to see if they would actually be able to navigate without their magnetic sense. And it turns out that birds, they have like, the magnet thing is just one part of navigation. They use like a ton of other different things. So they use landmarks, they use the sun, they use stars at night, and they use smell. And then magnets, obviously. But
Back up a second. They use smell?
they use
I was going to say, they
smell.
use stars?
Yeah, they use stars. Apparently there was a study where they like took a bunch of birds and they isolated them from any source of light or like point of light. They had another group they exposed to a planetarium and they like spun around the stars and stuff. And then they had a third group that was in the same planetarium, but it spun at a different point. And then I think at the end of the study, they released all the birds in the planetarium to see if they had any preference in direction. In the first group that was isolated, they didn't have any preference at all. It was just random. The second group, they had a preference to go away from the point of rotation. And then the third group, where the point of rotation was different, it was away from that different point.
Okay, so they're not recognizing stars, they're recognizing the whole sky rotating. That makes a little more sense for birds.
Yeah, it's just like a point of reference, and the stars act as a point of reference.
All right, makes sense.
I don't know about the smell exactly,
Yeah, that I
Back
have.
so Ben's question, so about that smell, huh?
but they did list it in one of the factors. So,
So they
I don't
smell
know.
for poutine to go north, and they smell
Yeah.
for what is stereotypically Floridian.
I think you can just smell Jersey and then either go towards it or away from it.
Right, and they just
At least
follow
in
the
North America.
highway, actually, after that point.
Yeah, just follow the 95.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they get into Jersey and they go from there, you know?
So to demonstrate that, like, they don't just rely on magnets. Well, when I was discussing this question with Marcus earlier, he had discussed he had jokingly said, put a magnet on a stick and like put it in front of a bird and see what happens. And I made fun of you for that. But that's not really that far off from what someone actually did. So someone decided to glue magnets to the backs of pigeons.
Oh god, why the back? You're trying to make them go in circles?
So it wasn't to like lead them to like make them go in a certain direction. It was to see if like disrupting the magnetic field affected them at all. So when they put the magnets on, it did disrupt them, and they were disoriented when it was overcast. But when it wasn't overcast, they weren't disoriented. So that kind of shows that they use the sun as like guidance. So like if there was no magnetic field, they could use other things. They could, if it becomes overcast, they might get disoriented for a little bit, but when the sun comes out, they'll be fine, and they'll still be able to migrate. So overall, I think birds will be okay. I want to look at some other things that might be affected, and bees also sense the magnetic field, and bees are also important to the world, as everyone knows. Everyone keeps on talking about that.
I mean, just look at the bee movie. Bees are like super important there.
Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld. But bees actually, I mean, it's basically the same thing as the birds. They use other things to navigate as well. It's not just the magnets. So in general, animals that migrate will be fine, I found.
Interesting.
Yeah, so migration's not going to be a problem. And I found it really hard to find like anything that would actually change or that would be like important. The only thing that I could find, or the closest thing to important that I could find, was that deer and cattle, they graze in the direction of north to south, and dogs poop in the direction of north to south. So
Wait, really? Like
Yeah.
all the time?
well, they have a preference. So it's not all the time, but like if you take a large sample size, then.
It happens more frequently than would happen by just random chance.
Yeah, so they actually did do like a study on it, and they watched 70 different dogs poop over 2 years.
Man, did you know you can get grant funding for anything?
Could you imagine saying that, being like, we're gonna see if dogs face a certain way when they poop. How long do you need? 2 years of observation.
Please tell me that this was someone's like doctoral thesis or something.
I don't know, but it was in a ton of different articles. It was like one of the things that kept on coming up.
It is
I don't know why.
Well, it's clearly a foundational text in the subject matter.
And so the deer and cattle one is actually kind of interesting because in 2009 they did a study where they looked at satellite images and they just to see like how deer and cattle were positioned, and they saw a preference towards north-south, but then wherever there were like power lines where it would interfere with the magnetic field, there'd be no preference. It would just be random.
Interesting.
So that was pretty interesting. But then I found another study in 2011 where they tried to do the same thing in Google Earth and they did not find the same results. So
who knows?
Oh, it's disproved. It's really annoying.
It's like our best and brightest are not the ones researching whether dogs poop north to south or not.
So then finally I wanted to look at humans because why not?
May as well.
Do we poop north to south?
So obviously you and I, we can't see the magnetic field, but we do have cryptochromes. We have Cry 1 and Cry 2. And someone actually did a test where they like got a bunch of people individually and they put them in a darkened room, and then they had like a magnetic field in like different orientations around them to see how their brain would react. And the brain did like respond to it. So we might have some sort of magnetic field sensing on like an unconscious level, but we don't really use it for anything. And we don't have, as far as like anyone's found, we don't have any preference in direction while we're doing anything like pooping.
So would you just feel like, I wonder if you just feel off if the magnetic field went away. You're just like, I don't know what it is, but everything just feels a little wrong today.
I'd also assume that we have so much like electronics around us all the time that it's just
that
sense is just not really that good with us anymore.
Right. It was interesting though because there was a study where they had fruit flies, because fruit flies have the cryptochromes too, and they use it to navigate. But there are some mutated flies that didn't have the cryptochromes, but in the study they gave them human cryptochromes, and the human cryptochromes helped them, and they got their sense back. So I don't know what that means. It implicates
It sounds
something.
like it segues into like a sci-fi thriller.
Yeah,
Right.
Flyman.
Yeah, we had flies who suddenly couldn't sense magnetic fields, so we implanted human eyes into them.
And they were really heavy and could not fly.
And then they were really heavy, and it was just a little eyeball with wings
Yeah.
on it now.
It was adorable.
But that's pretty much all I found. There was no conclusion. I don't know what would happen. I don't think much would happen in terms of animals if there is no magnetic field.
Yeah, that's fair.